everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Iliad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. A quick word before the show starts and an apology from me. When we recorded this, I had my 18-month-old daughter sitting on my lap. And she's adorable, but she doesn't quite understand that you're not supposed to shout loudly during podcasts or make baby noises. I've edited out as much as I can, and it's okay to listen to. You're not going to suddenly get deafened, but there is a little bit of a contribution there from her. So I'm sorry, please bear with us. This won't be happening regularly. So we're talking about Troy Fall of a Sissy, which is a Netflix TV series. Oh my God.
It's amazing, right?
So I've watched, I can't believe I didn't watch it earlier. I've watched the first 2 episodes and it's like...
So good.
It's really good. Oh gosh, so good.
I know.
Where do you want to start?
Let's just dive right into it, which is the tone, right, is so completely different from the movie.
It really is. So it's really interesting watching them both back to back because the atmosphere is completely different. Clearly the movie is like this big spectacular one-shot thing and there's like Brad Pitt doing all heroic stuff. It's a shame this is a podcast because my hands are doing some fascinating things right now. But it's got like Brad Pitt doing his heroic thing and then kind of being a dick, and it's lovely and exciting and kind of non-stop adventure. And then you have like this kind of atmospheric, a little creepy to begin. I mean, it's creepy to begin with, and then like the tension kind of just stays as you go and kind of slowly builds through the first 2 episodes, and it's so good, so good.
I know. I almost wish I'd recorded my reactions again because I watched it when it first came out, and then I feel like I went back to certain episodes here and there, but I haven't like sat down in at least 2-3 years, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot this and I forgot this. And yeah, tonally it's so different. I mean, there's some similarities, but I think like I definitely like it immediately better than the movie, but I do still maintain that I wish, like, the cast is great, but I kind of wish that some of the people who were casted in the movie were in the show.
Would also, that would have been good. Priam, I watched him, so when he first appeared, and this is like halfway through the first episode, so I'm jumping ahead mightily, but when he first appeared, I was like, is that, and now I cannot remember his name, and I'm going to shoot myself because it's an actor I know really, really well. It's the Scottish guy who played James Bond. I'm Googling Scottish James Bond. Sean Connery. There we go. Because when you first see him, it's from a distance, and he's got the facial hair thing going. I was like, is that Sean Connery? Like, no way that it's not Sean Connery, even a little bit, but that was...
Yeah, well, because they make it so, like, I mean, the makeup and the costume, I mean, it's like incredible because I don't recognize like half of these actors. I think that I think I looked it up, or I knew it once, but I think it's hilarious how they have Diane Kruger playing Helen in the movie, and I'm like, okay, she's a German actress. The actress who plays Helen in this one, I think she's also a German actress. And I was like, is there something about just casting German actors to play Helen? I'm like, I don't really... But I mean, you know, it's so interesting how not only are they is the tone different, but like the actors themselves casted are like different as can be. Like in the first one, you have this sort of vanilla blonde, blue-eyed or whatever she is, and then this one you have Helen like dark hair, dark eyes,
Mediterranean looking, fantastic. No, it was very good, and again, watching them back to back. Like, if anyone is listening to this, I would recommend doing that. Just watch the movie and then go and watch even just the first episode of the series, because it's really interesting, and I think it helps my brain pick up things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. My overriding sense of the movie is this like bright, boldly lit piece of cinematography, golds and bright colors, and then the TV show is very subtle, and it's the colors are much more muted, still beautiful, costumes still fantastic, much more intricate actually. I feel like the costuming in the TV show, but it's more muted. There's like, it opens in Paris is off on the plains with his cattle, and it's misty, and yeah, it was really, really interesting. And the two things, so I feel like the two things we picked up on with the movie was lack of gods and, oh my god, Paris and Helen are annoying. This one, gods, so far I think very well done gods.
Yeah, no, I really loved it.
Scary, creepy, threatening type deities.
But they're also kind of like they well, at least Zeus, as he's portrayed here, he's sort of this like benevolent, like, I'm just gonna watch and like watch these people like tear themselves to pieces, and he's like, don't worry, I promise I won't interfere, I'm just gonna watch, you know. And you're like, but bloodshed, but war, but, and he's like, no. He's like, you know, it's gonna last a long time. It's not gonna be fast. But carry on. And I'm like, really? But it plays so much better. Like, I do always get a bit worried when, you know, people say or you see that like a show is gonna have the gods in it, because I'm like, there's like a good subtle there's like a right way, and I think there's a very wrong way to put the gods in, because it can get really kitschy really fast,
like the Xena TV show, which I adore and we will watch later, but the gods are it's very camp.
Yeah, so I'm just like, the way they did it is they put it in, and like you clearly know it's the gods, but like it's not campy at all. And I do, and you know what I one of the things that struck me the first time I watched the series, and it reiterated again, I love the colorblind casting.
It's really enjoyable from a viewing perspective. I love the choice of Achilles. I don't think he's an actor I was familiar with beforehand, but he's like, he is quietly threatening, and he doesn't do a whole lot in the first 2 episodes. He like stays in his tent and then mildly threatens the Trojans in this pretend like diplomatic meeting. But I'm very excited to see how they do when he kind of breaks into violence mode.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to clarify for anyone listening as well that I have seen the series before, so I do know what comes, and all I'll tease for everyone here is that not only is the rest of the series amazing, but wait till you see Patroclus. It's like astonishing in like the best way possible, because you're not ready for it, and then it's like, that's Patroclus. Oh my god, like you just love what yeah.
So I have to spend tomorrow getting ready for a trip to Indiana, which is a 9-hour drive, and I have to spend Wednesday and Thursday driving. And now you have made it even more difficult, because what I wanted to do before this conversation was spend tomorrow watching Troy, and I can't. And now you've made it even more challenging for me to not just turn on my iPad while I'm packing and pretend to pack and actually just watch this. That's very intriguing.
So for anyone listening, you can probably skip ahead if you really want to die to know what's going on. All I'll say is it's fantastic, and there is like a shocker that was not really even in the original source material, but I love the extra what they put in there, and it's saucy. Anyway, so to not make anyone even more curious, one thing that also stood out is the movie is called Troy, but it's very Achilles centric. So it feels like they could have named the movie Achilles in the Trojan War.
Achilles goes to Troy.
Exactly. And like, because it does feel like you follow Brad Pitt. It's all about him.
I read an interview after watching the movie again. I read an interview with Brad Pitt where he said essentially, I could not get out of the camera. Like it didn't matter what I did, there was a camera, like, which was very interesting, because I kind of thought like, you're Brad Pitt. I feel like that's really what happens when you go and shoot a movie. And obviously this was much earlier in his career. But that was really interesting, that it feels like maybe he agrees that this isn't so much a movie about Troy, it's about Achilles. And maybe that wasn't a magnificent choice.
But it is interesting to hear that, because I didn't know if that was like a stylistic choice, or if, I don't even know what it was. All I know is like I guess it works for the movie, so even if that wasn't its intent, like it still works just fine and it's entertaining. But I do like how, I mean, the only difference between the titles really is one is Troy and one is Troy Fall of a City, but they both imply it's about the larger picture, and I really love how this one really captures like the larger picture. Like, and they added back so many characters that were missing, which I loved. And I think one of the things also that really stood out to me as well was that I think in the last episode, or one, you know, when we were talking about the lack of Iphigenia, she's here, and you know, the actress looked pretty young, but she was probably aged up even so. But because we were saying, right, that like child sacrifice does not play well with audiences. And so I found it interesting that they brought that back and graphically showed it happening.
Was not ready for that. Mind you, that whole sequence was heartbreaking. Clytemnestra was fantastic.
Yeah. No, it was brutal.
Absolutely fantastic.
But you know, they make a much better job of humanizing Agamemnon in this one, which I did kind of appreciate, because you know, it's fun to hate him in the movie version, but I'm kind of like, I know he's not as black and white as this. Like he probably didn't just, you know, kill her in a cold-blooded way and then just move on. This might humanize him too much in some people's eyes because he's still kind of an asshole, but like I appreciated not just being like, okay, here's the person we hate and hate and hate.
Let's give him another hateful thing to do. No, so the first 2 episodes, it starts with Paris in the hills doing his thing, and then it runs through like the first attack on Troy. And what you said about them being able to bring in a lot more source material is so true. And I think one of the reasons why I'm enjoying the TV show so much, because they've got that time, and because each episode is an hour long, which is, I mean, even though the movie Troy is nearly 3 hours, even I feel in the 2 hours that I've watched of the TV show, they've managed to put in a lot more like more intricacies, more nuance to the plot. You've got much more backstory for like all of the characters. Like, you know how Odysseus came to be here, you know how he tried to kind of trick his way out of coming. You get a flavor for his relationship with Penelope. You see much more of Menelaus and Helen together. And I feel like they spent a good amount of time actually developing a relationship between Helen and Paris. And especially with Helen, it's still an awful decision on her part, but it when you think about the war and the cost of human life, but you understand, I think, more. They've given her more of a motive for leaving. Like, she's miserable. This was an arranged marriage. She never wanted it. She says that he's not someone I would have chosen ever. She has this daughter. Like, I loved that they were considering marrying her daughter, Hermione, to Paris. I was like, oh, that's a dynamic right there. And Hermione is clearly unimpressed with her mother in general, and even more unimpressed that her intended fiance apparently is obsessed with her mom. I'm like, yeah, okay, I do see where you might be a little bit upset with that particular situation. But they make Helen much more sympathetic and give her a whole lot more agency.
I do love that.
Like, yeah, it's great. She's not snuck off, not forcibly. She's not coerced. Like, Paris asks her to come. She says no and tells him to go. And then the next day hides herself in a chest and kind of is transported aboard, and he doesn't even know until they're halfway across the ocean and he opens it up. But I liked that, and I still don't like Paris very much. And to be fair, given the source material, I don't think there's a lot you can do with Paris to make him that likable. The whole thing is a god plot, and again, in the TV series, they make that very, very clear. But also, he's just kind of a dick, really.
But I know I do. Well, they gave both of them more agency, I think, because they gave Helen like a billion chances to try to like say no at first, which she did successfully for a while. And like, in episode 1, Menelaus and Agamemnon's father apparently in Crete. I'm like, I don't know where that came from. But okay, his father in Crete. So like he dies, and so Menelaus is like all sad and dreary, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go to Crete for 5 days. I'm like, also, it would take so long to sail from the mainland to Crete in ancient times, and I'm like, in a little trireme, that's not I was like, it'll take you like 4 days to sail down, so that was a little unrealistic, but I'm like, okay, fine, 5 days, suspended reality of travel time. But they had Helen surprisingly be like, I'll go with you to mourn your father. And he's like, no, 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 we have a guest, we cannot, he's like,
it's like she's like super trying hard with this marriage, and you get the feeling that she has spent her entire life doing what she's supposed to and trying and like being the good queen.
Yeah, like they make her, I don't know, it's just maybe then they didn't have enough time in the movie because it's a movie, but like she, you know, in the movie you're like, it doesn't seem like she cares about anyone, and she just kind of walks around not caring or saying anything until she's like, Paris, okay, take me with you, bye. But this one, it's like, no, she's trying to be a queen. She has a daughter, she has servants, she has that like druggy cult thing where she goes and like drugs herself.
That was very interesting. I was like, oh, casual nudity and drugs again, not expecting this. Kind of adds to like the atmosphere. And then when Paris says afterwards, essentially, oh, you must be happy staying here drugged to a stupor, like, and you kind of get the feeling that it's this escapism thing because she's genuinely unhappy with her life. But no, not expecting very much. Like it added, I think, a lot to the atmosphere. It was good.
It did, and yeah, and then I really appreciated, even more than anything, I loved the whole. I mean, it's one thing to sort of give her agency to reject Paris like a billion times when he's like there begging her, but then to when she arrives in Troy. And they're like, you know, deciding what to do with her. And then she like comes into the room. And she's like,
and Priam said, no, I said I will see you later. And she's like, bitch, you will see me now.
Yeah, so she's just like, she's just like flounces into the room, announces herself, and is like, I know you're deciding my fate right now, but I need to be heard. And you're like, oh, honey, what? And then she gives this great speech about, I was a ghost. No, I did my duty. I was married off. I didn't choose it. And I'm here because I want to be. I have rights. I'm not a possession. I'm a woman. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. They really did give her agency. And I think it was really well written. And I like her so much better in the show. I mean, yes, again, still do not agree with her decision. I'm still just like, she left and she was clearly torn. But it seemed like she was more torn about just like upsetting. I don't know. To me, she mentions her daughter like once, and then kind of is not torn up about it. So I was kind of just like, oh, okay. So you're more upset about what, like just leaving your duty as queen than like your child. So that was quite interesting. But yeah, no,
much more agency and like, I don't know, more likable. She didn't feel like a 15-year-old star-crossed lover. It was I'm a grown woman. I've done what I'm supposed to do my entire life, and I am miserable. So for once, I am going to take a chance and do something for me. And it backfires spectacularly, obviously, but it's, I don't know, it feels more believable.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, there's a lot of things that just, they've made it and they've built it up and they really do their homework on you know, setting things up. So nothing really feels kind of like very sudden the way it did in the movie, where you're like, suddenly this happened, and then you're like, oh, I guess this happened too. Yeah, no, and I love that they included some of Paris's backstory. They included the contest with the golden apple, which I was like, I'd forgotten that they actually had put that in. I remembered vaguely that they'd like alluded to it, but I forgot that you actually get the whole scene. And I love the relationships between the goddesses, because they are like,
they are not friends.
No,
let us say that, not friends at all.
No.
And then Hera, like, is later in the second episode, right at the end of the second episode, Hera says to Zeus, essentially, Aphrodite cheated because she offered Paris flesh, and Zeus is like, and you wouldn't have done that because such things are above you. And it was a nice subtle takedown. All of them were cheating. They were offering him different things.
Yes.
She just happened to pick the one thing that he actually wanted.
And I appreciate actually that they didn't just continue calling him Paris through the whole thing. Like they set it up as he was Paris, but then they were like, no, he's Prince Alexander, and then they continue to use Alexander. And that is a direction I think a lot of people would be a little taken aback by, because they're so used to knowing him as Paris, and usually every depiction is Paris. But this is a change I really like. I don't know if it's because I just associate hearing the name Paris with like terrible things, but it's a little better that it's like Prince Alexander, and you're like,
It plays better generally.
I do like this actor a lot as well, but I don't know. So I go back and forth on he's still adequately like enough of a douchebag who just kind of like sleeps around and drinks a lot, and then just like, you know,
He's a frat boy.
Yeah.
He's a frat boy in a toga. Well, not a toga, but you know.
Oh my god, no, my gay friend, he calls them he would call him a basic straight, which I love.
He is. That's amazing.
Right. So I was like, so Paris is your basic straight. And yeah, I don't know, like it's well, he's so intricately tied also to they included Cassandra, guys. They have her, and I love what they did with her.
Oh, I was so happy when she popped up. So I did, when I was in high school, I did a couple of classes on Greek tragedy and loved it, and really haven't looked at any of them since. And like having Clytemnestra, having Cassandra there on screen, being, I think, pretty true to what you would expect from those tragedies, it was beautiful. And you're right, the way they did Cassandra is very, very well done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, it's quite exciting. I mean, I remembered the Iphigenia sacrifice. I did not remember Clytemnestra really being there. So I did really appreciate that as well. Because then it makes it easy to just like have a face and an emotion, and then you can kind of see why you're like, oh yeah, no wonder she's gonna go kill this douchebag who like killed her daughter. But like even that though, I still had a problem because he was so aggrieved, and I guess I wasn't expecting Agamemnon to be like, no, we need to find another way because I don't want to kill my daughter, you know.
He played that with a lot of emotion. It felt very raw and very real, and it was an act of desperation that he clearly didn't feel like he had any way out of it.
Yeah, and that's so humanizing. Like, I almost feel bad that he's gonna get killed now over the sacrifice, because I know what happens in Clytemnestra, but I'm also just like, oh, but he clearly, like, watching the way he was playing it, you're like, no, he really, 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 really did not want her to die. So then I'm like, oh, I feel bad that if he gets killed, and like he was so aggrieved, he just you know. So I was like, oh.
And it's really poignant as well. At the end of the second episode, they fight Troy, and Agamemnon says before they attack, this will take one day, essentially. We'll be there, we'll attack, it'll take one day, and then we can all go home again. And Odysseus says, how do you know that? And Agamemnon says, the blood of my daughter guaranteed it. And because we all know what happens, it was just, a tragic statement of the entire episode. And then after the day of bloodshed, and I felt like they filmed, or they portrayed the battle in a suitably like chaotic, like scary way. With the Troy the movie, it was all clearly choreographed, and again, bright sunshine, armor glinting in the sunlight, and it looked impressive. This was like smoke and blood and people getting stabbed in the head with a lance, which was again interesting and like not necessarily what I had planned or what I had expected. And they've got like this horrible day of battle, people dying, people screaming, and then Agamemnon says to Odysseus right at the end, why did I sacrifice my daughter? What was the point? And it echoes in the first episode. After he sacrifices her, he stands at the top of the mountain just screaming, why? For like several frames. It's really, it gets you. And that question is echoed again at the end of the second episode. Why? Why did I do this? And Odysseus looked at him and said, it was demanded of you. The gods didn't actually promise anything in return. They said there would be a good wind, and there was a good wind, and now we're kind of on our own again. And it was,
Yeah. No, I love how that also highlights like the duplicity, because I think when people start to assume, like when you do include the gods, they're kind of like, okay, so they'll determine the outcome. They'll promise you this, they'll do that, blah, blah, blah. But you're also like, yeah, but it's still kind of a game. It's like tossing the dice, you know, where you're like, okay, well, I'm asking for one specific thing, and they'll say yes, but then they could cause a lot of other things to happen. And it never really lets you settle into being like thinking, you know, oh, the gods are good, they're helpful. They're not. They're fucking assholes. Like, they do one nice thing for you, and then you're like, oh, this is great. But then I think, you know, that really serves to shock you into like, yeah, well, they did one nice thing, but like, that's the one nice thing you might get, and then you might not get anything else.
You're back to square one again. Yeah.
But I another thing I loved about the battle sequence they had in episode 2, it helps introduce you to some of the main figures within the battle. Based on, they have this beautiful scene where you have each goddess essentially saying which heroes they bless. So it's this great sequence of, you know, Odysseus, like the cunning, I bless you, you know, from Athena, and then you have Hera blessing her, you know, Ajax, and you have Aphrodite on her side, you know, blessing her heroes. And it's a great way not only to sort of show their influence, but also I felt like introduce people who may be or may not be familiar with a lot of the really famous heroes from the poem. You know, you just didn't get that in the movie. You just kind of got who was who based on who said something,
who you remembered, and and who had a bigger speaking role. And I enjoyed that as well. It just, for me, carried on the way, I think, the very appropriate way that they're dealing with the gods and with the divine in the series. Because as this happens, the goddesses are walking through the battlefield, and clearly no one can see them, but they are there, and they are obviously having an impact and an influence, which is kind of flipped from how it was with the golden apple thing, because Paris could see them all, and like was like, hang on, goddesses, this is interesting. So obviously he could see them, and then they can't be seen in the battle scene, and it was very, I don't know, it gives you a good tangible example of their power and influence, but also how they're acting kind of behind the scenes, because no one else knows that Helena's being given to Paris by Aphrodite. He's just stealing someone else's wife. So yeah, it was, I'm enjoying how they're doing that.
Yeah no, I am too. And finally, I guess, you know, it's a very small thing to people who, especially if they're not classicists, but I really enjoy the Nestor in this version, because he's still wise, he's still older, but he's clearly a king, a leader on his own. Yeah, he's doing, he's not just some like advisor who kind of like follows Agamemnon around. And it's actually quite striking that Agamemnon does not take center stage the way he does in the movie. In episode,
he's almost an ancillary character.
Yeah, because in episode 2 they have like, once they get to Troy, when they first arrive, they have this sort of parlay, if you will. And I found it really an interesting choice to have, obviously, Menelaus. You would assume he would be there, but then to have just Odysseus and Achilles. And Achilles is not doing anything.
Yeah, and Achilles hasn't even had that, he hasn't had any screen time. I think this is the second time we see him. The first time we see him, he just walks out of his tent. The second time, he's just randomly in this, in the Trojan, like, gathering, like, court, maybe, let's say court. And you're right, no Agamemnon. I feel like it's a nice foreshadowing of the role he will play, and familiarizes maybe the audience with, this is someone I have to watch out for. Because Odysseus has had a lot of time leading up to it. You know his backstory, you know kind of what kind of a person he is. Menelaus, obviously, you know really well. And Achilles, you don't know well yet, but you've had enough hints throughout the first 2 episodes that this is someone you should be familiar with and you need to watch what he does. And he's actually in the battle. He's the person who takes a spear and throws it at a running Trojan soldier, manages to spear right through the back of the head, and it kind of comes out through his mouth. Very graphic. I can't watch this with my husband, as an aside, because he's very gore averse, and this would not be a good thing for him at all. But again, that is just this one little thing that Achilles does, and you think, that's obviously technically difficult to do. And the fact that they're picking it out of an entire battlefield, clearly this is someone I need to be familiar with.
It's interesting as well, some of the other dynamics that they do. You have Hector there, which I want to say, I'm very familiar with the actor who plays Hector. I've seen him in other series, and I really like him. And I think it's a really interesting choice to have him in here because he's still Hector in the way we imagine him, but he's also different. Like, you know, if you were to compare him and his performance and his portrayal with Eric Bana, he doesn't like Paris.
No, and that was a really interesting thing about, again, watching these two adaptations so close together. Hector and Paris do not like each other. Hector nearly kills Paris in the opening when he first comes to Troy, and then he's clearly pissed when Helen comes to visit, and he doesn't want war. He can see this going horribly badly. And Andromache also, another fantastic character. I think the actress brought an awful lot of personality to what has so far been quite a minor role, but neither of them want Helen there at all. They're furious, and Hector is having to go out and fight for Paris, who is not allowed to himself fight. His parents won't let him go out. And you can kind of feel the resentment there, which I think is great, because the movie one, it's very much, the relationship is very much one of, I think, protection. And, he's my brother, he did a stupid thing, and I'm just going to have to clean up his mess, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't seem in keeping with the magnitude of what's happening. And the relationship here wasn't great to begin with. And you really get a sense of Hector being just furious. Why are we having to deal with this ridiculousness over some shepherd and a queen, essentially?
Yeah. Well, and then they left in the other sons of Priam, which I thought was a really cool choice as well, because I think people do kind of forget that they're not the only ones.
Didn't Priam and Hecuba have 19 children or something?
Yeah, they have a lot. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I read something that was like they had the 12 children of Priam.
12.
But,
okay. That's a bit more reasonable than 19. But still, a lot of kids. And I guess maybe not that weird for the ancient world, and especially if you've got royal family stuff going on. You need a lot of sons to make sure one of them's alive by the time they hit adulthood.
I guess, wait, what was it? Oh my gosh, I'm probably forgetting one of the, I'm remembering half the scene because I watched it last night and I was kind of tired, but during the very violent battle scene, they basically intercut, so they have a few shots of battle, and then it goes to this very graphic sex scene between Paris and Helen, and you're like, oh, this is really, okay, this is intense.
It is clearly not a TV show for a PG-13 crowd.
No. And that's the other thing. The movie, it had to be audience friendly for younger kids, so they didn't have a lot of too graphic, at least sex, and some of the battle, I suppose, yes, was but I feel like they cut a lot of it.
It was relatively sanitized. There's been, again, 2 episodes in, there has been a substantial amount of sex and blood, and not toned down in either case. But you're right, the choice to intercut the battle scene with Helen and Paris having sex, I think, was quite clever, and continually reminds the audience, this is happening because this is happening.
This series obviously is going to expand and introduce so many more people, because obviously the cast from the source material is huge. But I love how many people we got introduced to. Like, I love how they included Aeneas, and he's not just some random dude at the very end, like, fleeing the city. He's like a leader. They're like, oh, the leader of the Dardanelles is here. And they're like, it's Aeneas, and he's part of the war council, and blah, blah, blah. I'm very impressed with what they did because they have such a large cast of people that they have to introduce. And they managed to make it memorable enough that you kind of remember who is there, and like when they're introduced you're like, oh, okay. That, and then the costumes in the series, while there are still some like oriental kind of influences, it doesn't feel quite as separate and exotic to me, I guess.
Yeah, there's more. I think maybe because the colors are more muted. The blue in the Troy film was very bright and like quite jarring against the mostly browns, blacks of the Greeks' costuming. So I think having muted colors has helped an awful lot. Helen seems to be, even when she was in Sparta, costumed in a much more ornate, elaborate fashion than any other woman, which, you know, makes sense because she's Helen. She's the most beautiful woman in the whole of the world, and she has the face that launches 1,000 ships. So obviously you're going to do something with her costume. But it was different enough to be distinct, the Trojans' costuming, but not so different that it feels out of place.
But I had to laugh because I'm like, like in one of the scenes she came in and I was just like, so many feathers. Like,
her very first entrance, she's wearing like a choker of feathers that extends her in like up her entire throat, which looks, I mean, just uncomfortable. That did look out of place. I was asking myself, why on earth is this woman Helen? Because it took away so much from like her physical beauty.
It was, I just remember it being quite extravagant, and I just kept thinking to myself, there's like, what? Like, there's no way. That was mainly also for like most of her wardrobe when she's still in Sparta. And I'm like, is that because she's the queen and maybe is it like she's so miserable kind of in like a loveless marriage, although she tries though, so I can't really call it love. I mean, she says she doesn't love him, but I'm also like, yeah, but you see her early interactions with Menelaus,
and Menelaus clearly has a great deal of affection for her. Honestly, having spoken about how realistic it was, that didn't strike me as an unhappy marriage, and she didn't seem, I don't know, miserable. And it, again, people act how they're supposed to act, and she's supposed to be a happy queen, so she's a happy queen. But it seemed, until she said, I've never been happy here, I didn't see much of a reason for her leaving. And I think that was one of the things that makes her a more sympathetic character, because when Paris first like starts his flirting thing, she's like, what are you doing? Stop it. You're here to marry my daughter. I'm fine. Go away. It wasn't a instantly jump into bed with you type thing. And when they do have sex, it's right as he's tried to leave the city already. So it felt more like a last ditch, I'm just going to say goodbye to this person that I've developed feelings for. Maybe we're not going to see each other again until my daughter's wedding to him. So we'll have sex, he'll go, and it'll be fine. And this is not going to be a problem because he's leaving.
Yeah. No, because it was especially, well, she sneaks out to like her little cabin thing in the woods. I was like, where is this?
Also decorated with feathers. Like, there's a lot of feathers in this show. And then Hera later has a peacock feather cape, which was pretty cool. I was like, that's subtle. I like it.
Yeah, but no, it's very funny. Yeah, because he like sneaks out there, and I love the dialogue that they have between the two of them, because suddenly somebody was like, I'm mad for you, and it's like, well, but how did but yeah, I was a bit confused. I was like, but how did, I don't know. She seemed like she was supposed to be kind of a good, pious wife, definitely. And I find it really interesting how when Menelaus sees her again in Troy in episode 2, like the first thing he asks because clearly when you watch the movie, Menelaus like storms into the room and he's like, where is she? What's going on?
I want her back so I can kill her myself.
Yeah, and he's all just like, like implying that like the minute that the fisherman or whatever was like, I saw her leaving with the Trojans, and he was like, okay, get my captain, we're going, to see my brother. So in the movie, that was very much like he blamed her immediately for going. He assumed that she willingly left. And in this one, he doesn't, because when he sees her, the first thing he's like asking her, genuinely concerned, is like, are you okay? Are they treating you well? Like, did he steal you away? Are you here against your will? Am I here to be saving you? And then when she so calmly just, I thought it was very powerful that like the first thing out of her mouth really was just like this sort of very blunt, I fell in love. No, I'm here willingly, and I'm sorry I didn't love you. Which I felt so bad for him, because like his poor shocked face at the, I don't understand. What do you mean you don't love me? Clearly, he's like, well, we've had a daughter, and, you were being a dutiful, loving wife before.
And he says, what did I do to deserve this? Or words to that effect. And she said nothing. I liked it on two levels. I liked it because he's not a bad person. Nowhere in this does he come off as a bad person. He's a king. He's a product of his time. He clearly loves his wife, is providing for his daughter, and like doing all of the things that his society tells him he's supposed to do. But she's still miserable. So he didn't do anything wrong on the mortal sense. But then also you think about the fact that this is all prompted by some bizarre contest of the gods. He hasn't done anything to offend the gods either. He's done his thing. He's probably given his sacrifices and been a pious Spartan ruler. And yet he's still losing, essentially.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's great because it shows how powerless all these people are to the whims of the gods and their games, It's almost tragic. I mean, when I watched the movie, it's kind of one-dimensional because there's no gods, and then it takes away from a lot, and so then I'm kind of like, okay. But no, this one I'm like, I actually feel bad for everyone involved.
There's no one in here that I think, you probably deserve this. Sure, they have flaws, they're characters, they're well-rounded characters, but none of them are the bad guy. The gods are the bad guys, but none of the humans really deserve anything that's happening to them.
And I think I like that better. Although sometimes I think, is this humanizing it like too much? Sometimes I read the original source material and I'm like, well, okay, I feel this way about a person for like a certain reason. I mean, that said, we're here mentioning how, we kind of feel bad for Agamemnon for once. We don't just hate his guts as like a really shitty dude, which usually he is. But that said, it's like, we haven't gotten to the whole Briseis thing. We haven't seen how he treats Achilles. We don't know. I mean, they're doing such a job. I mean, they include things that they don't have to, like during the parlay. I found it really striking that when Priam is like, can we just offer you the gold, and for you to go home, we'll compensate you. And then I found it a really interesting choice for Odysseus to be like, no, because the great king sacrificed his daughter to be here. Oh, and he did it with his own hand. And then you see their faces, you see Priam look at Hecuba and just like, between them, like, oh my God, he killed his own child. Like there could be no worse feeling. And then, shockingly, when they're like, Helen is yours, you're not expecting that. You're just like, wait, what?
Especially because they'd had that conversation previously, and she'd be like, I don't want to go. I'm a woman. I'm not a possession. I choose to stay here. I am happy here. And they're like, okay, you can stay. You tell everyone we'll treat you as like a beloved guest and friend, and then okay, you can take her.
Yeah. I also just found it really interesting that like they made the Greeks willing to tell the Trojans what it took for them to be here. And I found it also interesting how in the movie they're like, oh, okay, well, Agamemnon needs no excuse. He's kind of a warmonger, and of course he wants to conquer the city anyway, which he still kind of does at this point. He still wants it, especially after sacrificing his own daughter for it. But at the same time, like, it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like that's his only aim. You know, they made it feel like, no, he didn't want to be here. He didn't want to do this, but because he had to, this is why he wants your city. And so when they like present the demands, you know, they're kind of just like, he did it because he already sacrificed a lot. I'm sure you can understand how horrible this is. And I thought that was a really interesting choice that they made.
It was good, and I think you're right. I think the sacrifice of Iphigenia. I feel like if Agamemnon hadn't sacrificed her and they'd gone, and Priam had said, "You can take Helen," the Agamemnon we have and the rest of the kings that we have in this series would have said, "Okay, ciao, we'll see you later." But because of Iphigenia, it's not really enough anymore.
No, I think the whole thing is quite well done. Quite well done. I'm looking forward to rewatching because I haven't seen it in for so long, and I really like the darker tone of this. And the costumes, to me, the costumes are much more accurate. You know, they talk about Hector's horse hair, helmet, and his long flowing. But well, that's the only thing they got wrong. He has like long hair, and then Hector apparently has like a buzz cut or almost one. I was like, what happened to his hair?
I think that was probably like this man is a soldier, we need him to look like a soldier, and in modern world soldiers have like no hair. But it was a little jarring, especially with Paris being... You think so? She thinks it was jarring too, especially with Paris being this kind of dandy with long curly locks.
Actually, come to think of it, none of them have long hair, and they all would have had long hair. Wow, that's weird.
Odysseus probably has the longest.
And his isn't very long. It's not even shoulder length. Also, did you find it quite interesting to show this dynamic with Penelope and Telemachus? Like, it's not long. You know, they don't go into the whole story of Odysseus, but they show them.
It makes me wonder if they were planning on doing an Odyssey at some point.
I hope so. I like the actor. He seems calm. He kind of has this, silvery tongue. He sort of whispers his lines in this very dramatic sort of, like scarred whisper, my king. It works for him. Although is it terrible of me if every time I see him, I still kind of think, yeah, but I wish you were Sean Bean in this.
No, it's not terrible. I think that's reasonable. I do recognize him though. Was he in Sparta? Or 300?
If he was, I didn't recognize him. They use a lot of famous people.
I know Menelaus as well.
Yeah.
Can't remember where from, but I know him.
Yeah, I felt like that for a lot of the people who were present in the series, where I'm like, oh, I know you from something. I don't remember where, but like I've definitely seen you. The actress who plays Andromache, I've seen her in things, but I'm like, I don't remember what I've seen her in, but I've seen her. I don't know. So I guess because it's so tonally different from the movie, like what's something you're really excited to or curious to see, in some of the upcoming episodes that now we know they have gods, they have, more characters. So like, is there like a certain person or whatever that you're interested in seeing?
Based on what they've done with Helen and Andromache, I am interested to see what happens with Briseis, what kind of a character she is. I was interested to see what happens with Patroclus and Achilles before you told me that it's super cool. So my interest is even more piqued than it was previously. I think those are the two big ones for me. How about you? I know you've seen it before, but maybe going forward, what is something that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, also it's been a really long time. So I would say... this is kind of a spoiler, but kind of not, because it doesn't spoil anything really. But Penthesilea actually is in the series, and I don't remember a lot, but I do remember that the actress they had playing her gave a really interesting portrayal and she looked, the way she was presented was a lot different than I thought she would be. And so I can't remember a lot about it, but I'm excited to see Penthesilea and how she's and the Amazons are basically introduced. Yeah, I don't know. It opens up a lot. Achilles gets an actual interaction with Helen. It reminded me a lot when I was remembering it of Wrath Goddess Sing. So we get this, we got the beautiful scene where Achilles tries to sneak in and just take Helen and try to end the war, but we get a very similar thing where Achilles kind of like tries to find her, and their interaction, I remember, was kind of really interesting and not what I was expecting. So I'm really excited for that as well.
That does sound interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. It's so funny because it's like there's so much, because it's such an expanded universe that I'm like, wait, there's a lot actually.
I am really enjoying the level of detail, and obviously that's a bonus, right, of making something a TV show rather than a movie. You get all of this extra time to expand on interesting things. I'm really enjoying just the sheer level of detail. I think we're going to wrap up here, but we will be back next week looking at the next couple of episodes of Troy Fall of a City. So I hope you can join us then, and if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend going and starting the series. It's really great TV.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.